On Tuesday, Jahangiri, senior vice president under Hassan Rouhani, who was also a candidate for this upcoming Friday's election, officially announced that he was dropping out of Iran's presidential election only 3 days before the vote. This was a generally expected move and will boost support for the incumbent Rouhani. Jahangiri told a crowd who had gathered at his campaign stop in the city of Shiraz, "I have accomplished my historic duty. Now, alongside all of you, I will vote for President Rouhani to help continue our country's path to progress. I joined the race to give the reformists a voice." Rouhani, who is also on the campaign trail for a bid for re-election to a second term, thanked his deputy and said, Mr. Jahangiri had stepped up to disclose some facts and realities during the presidential debates. Voters will now have 4 candidates to choose from on Friday, May 19th. Rouhani, Raisi, Mir Salim, and Hashemitaba. Mir Salim and Hashemitaba are not expected to gain many votes, and the latter even recently told a reporter that he too would vote for Rouhani. On Monday, May 15th, Tehran's Mayor Ghalibaf, who was running for the 3rd time as presidential candidate, stepped down to throw his support behind Ebrahim Raisi, a hardliner with a long history of brutal executions. Raisi, who is considered to be the supreme leader Ali Khamenei's close longtime confidant and favorite, is also said to be a favorite of the Revolutionary Guards, who now control all of Iran's economic power both inside and outside the country. And though throughout his presidency, Rouhani has crossed swords verbally on several occasions with the Revolutionary Guards, it is a known fact that his failed Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran deal, with the Obama administration gleaned one excellent result for the IRGC, in that it lifted the sanctions directly and specifically benefiting them.
Today, the Washington Post has published an op-ed written by Seth M. Siegel, the author of Let There Be Water, about Israel's solution to the water crisis in the world. Seth Siegel has talked about the hard situations that Iranians will face because of the water crisis. Siegel writes, due to gross water mismanagement and its ruinous impact on the country, Iran faces the worst water future of any industrialized nation. After the fall of the Shah in 1979, water policy became a victim of bad governance and corruption, putting the country on what may be an irreversible path to environmental doom and disruption that owes nothing to sanctions or years of war with its neighbors. Beginning in 1987, as the war with Iraq was ending, the Special Military Force of the Iranian regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was given a special perk. Among other strangleholds on the Iranian economy, IRGC-owned companies, including Khatam al-Anbiya, its construction arm, were given control over major engineering projects throughout the country. Recklessly, these companies began damming major rivers, changing the historical water flows of Iran. This was done to give water preferences to powerful landowners and favored ethnic communities, while also transferring billions from the public treasury to IRGC leaders' accounts. In all, since the 1979 revolution, more than 600 dam projects have been completed, contrasted with 13 dams built in Iran prior to the Shah's fall. 2 months ago, I visited Seth in New York to interview him for my other show, Abangan, and we talked about the water situation in Iran.
جمهوری اسلامی طبیعتاً با اسرائیل در مورد مسئله هسته‌ای نگاه متفاوت داره. یکی از مسائلی که اخیراً بحث شده این هست که برای نمک‌زدایی از آب خلیج فارس و یا دریای عمان برای استفاده مردم ایران بیان و طرح‌های مختلف نمک‌زدایی رو ایجاد بکنن که البته انرژیشون قاعدتاً بایستی بر اساس نظر مدیران ارشد جمهوری اسلامی از انرژی هسته‌ای تامین بشه. خب این میتونه بهانه‌ای برای توسعه برنامه هسته جمهوری اسلامی باشه. شما در مقاله‌ای که در نیویورک تایمز نوشتید به این مسئله اشاره میکنید که بحث هسته‌ای میتونه به نحوی جایگزینی براش وجود داشته باشه برای در حقیقت تولید انرژی برای نمک زدایی. میتونید در این باره توضیح بیشتری بدید؟
You know, I can get into the nuclear issue in a moment, but I also want to say that there's something that you're not mentioning in your question, and that is that geologically speaking, much of Iran is earthquake-prone territory, and when you have the possibility of seismic action or earthquake action, large or small, the problem is, what do you do with the spent nuclear fuel? People don't think this through. You need to have a place after your fuel that you've used for your desalination, your electric power, or whatever. I'm pretending for a moment that the leaders of Iran, the Revolutionary Guards, and the administrations of government are all legitimate in like Canada or Belgium or Spain. Let's just imagine that for one moment, okay, before we get to the reality of why they should not be permitted to do what you're talking about. But the problem is that once they have done this, what are they going to do? Where would they be the offtake for the spent fuels? They have to make sure that there's a repository for that. And maybe Russia would agree to do that. I don't know. But until we know where the spent fuel is going to go, I would personally, if I'm an Iranian, I would be terrified by this. Imagine the government's plan is to do what? To dig a deep well, to put a cement cover on it, and then to place all the spent nuclear fuel. Well, that's a great idea until you know when? Until the first
Major earthquake.
or even minor earthquake that cracks the cement. And then what happens is the nuclear fuel will leach into the soil, will completely contaminate the water, not for a year or 5 years, but for everyone's
Permanently.
lifetime.
Wednesday is the last day for campaigning inside Iran. Reformists are now rooting for Rouhani. Iranian reformists now have two rivals, Raisi and a big number of people who are boycotting the election. They have been actively demanding cooperation from the silent majority. Conversely, many Iranian activists inside and outside of Iran have called for the boycott of the elections altogether, literally saying no to the system. Reformists have been trying to warn disenchanted voters away from the boogeyman that has been on a rampage, sending people to the gallows. Omitting the fact that Raisi has been carrying out orders in his own capacity as a member of Iran's judiciary. Rouhani has made a lot of promises in the last 2 weeks, but many disappointed voters are voting for change, which is what Raisi promises. Now the candidate, who has been one of the highest-ranking judiciary officials and responsible for the Islamic regime's systematic human rights violation, claims to be championing millions of people in rural areas against status quo. Today is the last day of campaign ads and the promotion of candidates via media in Iran. City council candidates are also making rounds with their little promos. And thanks to Photoshop, which has made for some comedic adjustments, such as cutting off the finger of a female candidate who shows off some curves to voters as well. The reformists have been suppressing the demands of the people who are boycotting the election, asking them not to demand more and abide by the conditions of the election by supporting Rouhani. Rouhani has said that with the supreme leader's support, he will achieve his goals. All the while, this being a promise from someone who has been an active and expert part of the system for 38 years, this is being the unacceptable factor for those who are saying no to the election. One activist boycotting the election from inside Iran told Iranistas that people must say no and not vote in order to break the vicious circle of this regime in favor of advancing civil and human rights. Meanwhile, after 6+ years under house arrest, the two candidates from the 2009 election, Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mahdi Karoubi, announced yesterday that they will in fact be voting for Rouhani. I'm with Banafsheh Zand in New York. Banafsheh, what do you think about the human rights records of both front-running candidates in Iran?
The fact is that both of the candidates are seriously problematic. They have very, very dark report cards. Raisi himself having been the a high-ranking member of the Iranian judiciary, was implicated and is known to have been critically involved in the 1988 murders, summary executions of the Mujahideen Khalq members and communists in Iran. And he has continued on that path with the fact that he has handed down some of the most brutal execution orders for various Iranian activists and just average Iranians. So he has a lot of blood on his hands. And Rouhani, well, we have been witness to the fact that during his presidency, he has been someone who, under who the execution rates in Iran has greatly skyrocketed to my surprise, frankly, because I thought that Ahmadinejad would be the person who would show that kind of a record, but at this juncture it seems that the rampant executions under Rouhani are something unmistakable.
And we have to add that Rouhani, as the former secretary of the Iranian Supreme National Security Council, was responsible for suppressing many actions and activities in the late 80s and early 90s, and even in the 1999 student movement event, he was actually the one to order IRGC to attack the students.
That's right. It's a known fact that he was very much in the middle of the 1999 student uprisings of Tehran University, and that he was very much for quashing those protests, but he very deftly tries to cover those up and not let it get out in order to taint this kind of a populist air that he tries to give himself and the standing that he wants to conjure up for himself in the international arena.
And what about the women in Iran and activists who are supporting women's rights? What are they actually saying right now about the elections?
Well, we know that a huge majority of Iranians have said that they're going to boycott the elections. The fact is that every year, many activists inside and outside Iran call for the boycotts, and we will never really have the correct number of how many turn out for the vote. But it is a known fact that a majority do not turn up, though the international media has never allowed that reality to specifically be shown to the international public. To that end, women are clearly not going to participate either. The majority of women activists and women who are outspoken about the realities of the Islamic system in Iran. And the fact is that, as we saw yesterday in our Iranistas episode, the mother of Rayhana Jabbari, who was a woman who was falsely accused of having murdered a man a few years ago, was executed in 2014, and her mother, Sholeh Pakravan, issued a statement basically lamenting the situation and why she too is going to be standing against the elections and refusing to vote.
Though we know that many female actresses have been supporting Rouhani in the last few weeks and asking people to participate and not to let the other side gain any votes.
Well, that I think is a situation where most people need to realize that if you are somebody who's in the public eye, or somebody who is a civil servant for that matter, in other words, your job and your well-being, your livelihood, the ongoing of your ability to practice your career, your vocation, keep working, you basically have to vote. It's not a situation where you can just stand by and join the ranks of the protesters. It is something that is held over your head, and it is something that goes into your record. So if an actress who wants to show up on a set of her next movie, she better show up to the polling stations and
they're also campaigning.
Exactly. Well, that's a part of that, sort of goes hand in hand with the duty of voting, I believe.